The Evidence and Lessons from Latin America program is a South-South research and knowledge exchange program. It began in 2010. It's funded by the UK Department of International Development. And the objective is for Latin America and other regions of the Global South to share knowledge about different development issues. We focused on many subjects, economic subjects, social, environmental issues. So in this second phase of ELLA, since 2014, research centres from Latin America have been paired with research centres from Africa to undertake research on specific issues, regional research in their own regions, and then comparing between the two regions in order to get a consensus view on the importance of particular issues. So based on that research, we've then run research knowledge exchange programs where people can learn from each other. We have peer-to-peer online learning communities, dissemination events, study tours, and awards. We grant awards so that people can put their learning into use. Okay, over the last 3 years, Grupo Faro from Ecuador and ACOD from Uganda, two think tanks, have been conducting research on local content policies in the Latin America and Africa regions. The aim of this research was to try and identify the key variables, the key policy variables that lead to successful local content outcomes in terms of generating local employment, developing skills of the local labour force, national industry participation. And they looked at, Grupo Faro looked at 7 countries across Latin America, and ACOD at 7 countries in Africa. And then the results of that process were then compared to identify, as I say, these key variables. So it's quite a complex exercise because it's a whole lot of variables will influence the outcomes of local content policy. But overall, what we found was that there are 3 or 4 main variables which were important. Firstly, you need to put in place a quite detailed and specific local content policy and legal framework if you're going to make things work properly. Secondly, there needs to be quite an important role for the national oil company in taking forward the objectives of the local content policy for pushing this forward. And thirdly, put in place institutions that are actually going to monitor whether that local content policy is being adhered to and being implemented effectively. Of course, that's within a context where other variables come to play, such as having a good, enabling business environment for the private sector. These are also background variables which are key to success in local content policy. So, based on the research that had been done by Grupo Faro and ACOD, the ELLA Programme set up a range of activities to promote knowledge exchange about that research between peers in Latin America and Africa. So we ran online communities, we set up a study tour, and as I mentioned, we also had awards in place to help people learn from this, learn from the research findings. Now, when we were setting up the study tour, two participants from Chad, who'd been members of the online community, had been selected to participate in the study tour to Ecuador. Those two had also been members of the UNCTAD project on enhancing linkages in the mineral sector in the Central African Economic Community. And UNCTAD got in touch with us to find out if some other participants from that same project could also join in the study tour to Ecuador. And so they proposed 2 people from Congo, Brazzaville, and they did. They joined in the study tour, and I'm very pleased to say that the cooperation with UNCTAD went very well, and those participants, the 4 participants, were very full members of the study tour. So it all turned out very well. The study tour was a very interesting one, I think. In many ways, Ecuador has an interesting story. The oil industry there is about 40 years old, and for the first 3 decades or so, there was a focus on local content in terms of local employment in particular, and some forward and backward linkages in the oil and gas chain. But in some ways it's the story of the last 10 years which has become more interesting, as Ecuador has sought to try and reduce its dependence on the oil sector through a whole series of measures to promote economic diversification. So it's now looking not just through local content policy, but also through horizontal linkages and the directed use of resources to broaden the base of the local skills and the local economy. As I say, to try and reduce economic diversification. So the participants in the study tour, they were able to speak to government officials, to the oil companies themselves, to understand a little bit about this history and how it's developed over the last 3 or 4 decades. I think there are many lessons from the study tour that participants would have taken away, but perhaps the main one for me would be that countries which are at a fairly early stage in terms of the development of their oil industry need to be planning now at this stage for how to avoid an overdependence on the oil sector. Oil will not be around forever, and it's important that these countries think about how they're going to avoid an overdependence on the oil sector, so that in 20, 30, 40 years' time they don't find themselves in a difficult situation. So since we've had the study tour, we've been following up with people who've participated in the study tour itself and also in the online community. And it is very interesting to see how they've taken away the lessons from ELLA and from the visit to Ecuador, and then being incorporated both in countries in East Africa, which are perhaps at an earlier stage in the development of their oil sector, and also in the West African and Central African economies where oil is more established. So we're very pleased with this, the outcome that we've achieved, and I think it's been excellent to be able to cooperate with UNCTAD in this process, and thank you very much and look forward to further collaboration opportunities.